Syndicated source material.
I'm going to get into part 14 here. There's a lot of things that happen in here. It's hashtag fight Carnage. You can probably put fight Carnage, fight Carnage, fight Carnage. Rinse, repeat.
However, I should also say this is the fact that most of the fighting is like localized towards Venom and Carnage specifically helps make it less obnoxious. And Venom has some really funny one-liners in this last issue. Carnage is weakened by the happy gun, and he's out of sorts and not really thinking straight for him. So most of this issue is just Venom beating 7 shades of shit out of Carnage, and it's awesome up to this point because you haven't really seen that up until this point. So it's payback time.
That's true, and we got Ron Lim, by the way. Ron Lim is back, baby. Some beautiful art in these fight scenes. Just some stuff that I was like, yes, this looks awesome. You covered it pretty much because it's been just pounding on Carnage. Carnage going back at it. Spider-Man is trying to stop Venom from killing Carnage. He clearly has the opportunity to do so a few times. We get Ribs Part 2 in here too, where Venom gets pissed off and hits Spider-Man on the other side of his chest.
This poor bastard and his ribs, man.
In the midst of the fight, Spider-Man gets nailed on the other side, and I think Spider-Man's finally just like, damn it, I gotta go get this shit checked out. Because I think at some point he blacks out, wakes back up. It's only a couple minutes according to the comic. He's like, all right, I'm done. I'm gonna go get checked out. I want to go to the hospital because I need to fix myself. Continue to go on while Venom is chasing after Carnage. Spider-Man makes his way to the hospital, gets his ribs bandaged up. We have a resolution here between Mary Jane. I don't think it happens yet, but he's talking to her like, look, we've got Carnage still out there. And Mary Jane, throughout this whole series, you're supposed to take 2 weeks off with me. She's obviously torn about the fact that she has a superhero for a husband. And she doesn't like it, I don't think, at all. And of course, Peter's got his sense of responsibility to go out there and take care of things. So we get a little bit of that going on when you're reading Carnage. Ask why he's doing something. I've read it as to whether they put any thought into that. I don't know. But Carnage goes back to Riker's Island in here. I have no idea why. Carnage is not right in the head. I guess that's the point. He's going back throughout his past.
Yeah, something along the lines of he's escaping into his past in a vain attempt to escape from Venom. The blast he got from the happy gun affected him a lot more than he thought. He's all over the place now, which makes him even crazier and probably more dangerous than ever. He crashes his old cell at Riker's. Venom is right on his ass, tracking him down. They fight really quick there. And they're out of there just as quickly as they got there. They're basically just kicking the crap out of each other across the entire city while Spider-Man's getting his stuff together and getting ready to go after both of them.
Yeah, Pete talks to his dad, and we have a bit of I almost want to say a reconcile, as Pete gets to confront him and say, hey, look, this is what I've just been through, and your advice in regards to monsters, because there's a point, I know, I'm pretty certain we covered it on the previous episode, where Richard tells Peter that there's nothing but monsters out there, and in order to defeat a monster, sometimes you have to become a monster. I think that's what he was saying. But Pete explains to his dad, hey, look, that's not how this works. I'm pretty much siding with his Aunt May's philosophy of things that she had touched on in one of the earlier books. But there's hope, there's love, and with that, you don't have to become a monster in order to defeat one. Now, let me ask you something here, Benjamin. As he's confronting his dad and he's telling him about that, as Pete's walking away, is his dad's fist clenched? Is he still pissed off or something?
No, I was afraid you were going to ask me about this.
I didn't know what was going on here. I didn't know if there was something that I was...
Dude, we only have so much time left, and I don't know how much I want to get into this about Peter's parents and the whole thing. I'll just say Tom DeFalco was the writer on this particular comic. DeFalco was also the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics at the time. So he was probably one of the only people who knew where the entire subplot with Peter Parker's parents was ultimately going. That was a setup for what was to come later on in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. It was David Michelini's last story that he wrote. It was at that point, the whole resolution and the end game with Peter Parker's parents. I had just read about this recently. That whole resolution and where it was all going was actually taken away from him at the last minute. The ending that he wrote was probably not the one he would have wanted to write. And I know what it is, and I'll talk to you about it later. If anybody wants to check it out, it's a story called Life, Theft, and Amazing Spider-Man. But let's just say it's not good. It makes no sense. And it was probably the most ridiculous way they could have gone with this whole thing with Peter's parents. There's a deep, dark secret that's being kept, and that's why Peter says we have to be honest with each other, and then he under his breath says, yes, we do. There's something to that. It's a really bad story. If you decide you want to cover it on this show sometime, it's your funeral. But trust me, if I had to explain what was going on with Peter's parents and what happens in Life Theft, we'd be here for probably longer than the time that we have. So it's probably just as well that I cut it off there. Their resolution was not what it was built up to be. It was built up for about 2 years, and it wasn't worth it. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. So this is a two-part issue where they do Chapter 14, Part 1 and Part 2. And the end of Part 1, Spider-Man gets the blessing from his wife. She's not saying, oh, yeah, go out there and do it. She's still telling him, I worry about you. But she does say that she's going to try her best to accept what their situation is. The fact that Peter Parker is a superhero and he's putting his life on the line. As a husband, I can tell you, I worry about my wife coming home. She works like 6 miles away, so it's not very far. But I still worry about her coming home. She definitely is not out fighting crime. So I can identify.
As far as you know.
As far as I know, that's true. That's very true. He reinvigorated with the blessing from his wife and the taping of his ribs. Spider-Man's off to find Venom and Carnage and stop this madness. Figure out what we can do to find a resolution of this. And Venom and Carnage fighting again in another prominent setting in Carnage's past, Cletus Kasady's past. He goes back to the orphanage. And we have a battle there. Spider-Man is able to intervene once again, stop Venom from potentially killing Carnage, and it's Venom and Spider-Man getting into a fight. We got a three-way dance, folks. ECW chants all the way. However, Carnage gets that and basically rolls out of the ring and heads to the back. Because he's out. In the midst of these two fighting, Carnage leaves, and they're like, where's he at? Now they got to try and tail Carnage. They find him in a cemetery. And we were just talking about it, he's going back through his past. Now, what the hell is at this cemetery that could potentially hold a key to Carnage's past? Well, it's Carnage's dead mother. And it's not like he's just sitting at a grave, kneeling down and saying, oh, man, things were great. No. Carnage is digging up his mom's coffin. So that just speaks to the madness of Carnage. Venom and Spider-Man find him there and attempt to subdue Carnage. We get a battle.
Another great Venom line, by the way.
What's
in
that?
an issue that's full of them, where Carnage says, "We demand a little privacy here." Venom says, "You'll get it. We'll bury you both in the same coffin."
Oh yeah, I
Venom
love
had
how
me cracking up in this issue.
one of the things that and maybe if you've got a short answer, great. If it's a long answer, you can just tell me offline. But Venom is always we, okay? And I'm not attempting to be French here. It's we will do this, we will do that. Carnage is not like that. Carnage is definitely I. So supposedly the Venom symbiote fathered the Carnage symbiote. Is there something that happened in Carnage's past that or something that happened when it bonded with Carnage that allowed it to be I for Carnage?
That I'm aware of, no. If I had to guess, it's just the writer forgot. Honestly, Carnage at first refers to himself and the symbiote as we a couple of times in the first story, but that's about it. He says I more. The animated series actually tried to come up with a half-ass explanation for why that is, like it was a one-line one line of internal. Yeah, it was like one line of internal monologue that Spider-Man had that said that Kasady had bonded more completely with the symbiote than Venom did, and that's why he refers to himself as I instead of we. And it's like, well, that's an explanation. That's an explanation.
I would lean that if I was to try, based on what I've read, I would assume this is something to do with Cletus's mindset. But again, it could be more of a bonding. Venom is going to kill Carnage, and Spider-Man steps in between. That is a common theme throughout these issues. As a kid in the 90s, I was all about the Punisher. I love that sense of justice being served in the Marvel Universe. And Venom took it to a whole new level. When Venom first was around, he was a villain. Then he became a vigilante and fought for the innocents, supposedly. And he had that harsh sense of justice, just like the Punisher did. Spider-Man, throughout this whole thing, struggled with that. And then finally, at this issue, he's resolved, okay, look, can't do it. Cannot kill this guy. Finally, he starts to make a case for Kasady to be the victim. And we saw a little bit of his history, how he was mistreated at the orphanage, abused, how he was bullied. He does this. There's a full page of Spider-Man getting in between Venom and Carnage and separating them, and he tries to make. He almost convinces Venom too that Kasady is the victim. But as he's in the middle of trying to make this case, Carnage grabs him from behind and is about to kill the guy. Carnage is about to kill Spider-Man. Just as he's about to deliver the death blow, someone recovering on the side of Spider-Man, the Black Cat makes her reappearance in this issue and is able to stop Carnage from potentially killing Spider-Man.
What is keeping that costume on?
I came this close to putting that as a part of my intro today. Because I'm like, man, there is some tape involved. That's all I can say. There has to be some tape. Has to be some tape. Black Cat's end on this now. Venom and Carnage going at it, and Spider-Man is trying to get in between them. Venom tackles Carnage, and they're flying into some generators. As Black Cat and Spider-Man get over there to try and see there's a huge explosion. See what's left of these two. Eddie Brock, Cletus Kasady, Venom, Carnage. Laying on the ground is Cletus. No sign of the symbiote. And no sign of Venom. At the end of this battle, Cletus Kasady is rendered incapacitated. Venom's gone. They call the Avengers in, throw Kasady on a gurney, and they say they're going to take care of him, put him in stasis. In the background lies the coffin that Carnage had in his possession, and it's open and it's empty. Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly.
And that's the end of our issue. Now, what are your thoughts on the whole Spider-Man trying to make Carnage out to be a victim?
On the sappy side, I don't know if he would have had quite as much sympathy for somebody who he knows is that bad, but I think he's trying anything he can to get Venom to stop and not outright kill him. Ultimately, Spider-Man and Peter Parker just doesn't want anybody to die, so maybe that's it. And like you said, it works, because Venom does have pause for thought, despite the fact that he's beating the living hell out of Carnage. Now he's beating the living hell out of him, and instead of taunting him, he's asking him, are you an object of hatred or pity? Are you worthy of vengeance or protection? So he's thinking about it, but he's probably still going to kill him.
Yeah, that's a good side of things, because I felt like I hated he's making an excuse, but he almost convinced that Kasady may be the victim here. If I was in that position, I cannot give Kasady a pass. I don't think he should be killed. It's a tough decision. I think that's where the message comes from that these writers were trying to get across. Amidst all this chaos and all these cameo appearances.
I think ultimately the discussion was more important than who was actually right or wrong. That's how I look at it. I think it's more important to talk about that sort of thing and to maybe think about it and to have those ideas come up. Because comics can do that. Comics are good for raising ideas. You don't have to necessarily come to a conclusion, but it's enough to just think about it for a second and consider this or that. People get too caught up sometimes in trying to be right and don't spend enough time thinking about, well, what's every side of this argument that I'm so quick to jump to one conclusion about.
I hear you. So, final thoughts here. I want to ask you a few questions. Maximum Carnage, where do you believe it suffers?
Where do I believe it suffers? Just the fact that it's not consistent. There are good ideas in here. There's a good story in here somewhere. There's actually a very good story in here somewhere to be told, but it just got lost in a lot of other things that were probably out of the control of the writers. It was a lot of good concepts got stretched out into oblivion until they didn't matter anymore. It was all about characters punching each other, and I got nothing against characters in comics punching each other. That's what I grew up on, and that has its place. But in any fiction, in comics, movies, TV, novels, if there's going to be action, or if there's going to be violence, or if there's going to be death, give me a reason to care. Give me something to hold on to as far as why does this matter that this is happening. And there wasn't enough of that in this comic until towards the end, when characters started having motivation. You started being made to think more about why this is all happening and what are the consequences. And that's another thing about this comic, is that consequences don't seem to be very far-reaching from one issue to the next. It's a lot of pointless fighting. And some of that was commentary, some of that was on purpose, and some of it was just padding.
Yeah. I echo the writing sentiments. It's pretty clear. That is one of the things that the drawbacks of this. It definitely feels money-driven. I don't like seeing 14 parts just so you can sell the other titles of your series. All right, now, what do you believe Maximum Carnage does well?
This was an attempt to hold up a lot of old-school philosophies in terms of comics and in terms of what is a hero all about. And you sort of, when I've had this discussion with friends of mine before, and I've heard other friends discuss it amongst themselves, there's a lot of talk about heroes that act like heroes, quote unquote. I don't entirely buy into the idea that a hero is only supposed to act one way, or that a hero is this and nothing else. There's no room for any in-between. I think Spider-Man as a character proves that hero is not necessarily always what you think they are. As long as they're true. Spider-Man's, in this comic, it's conveyed in a pretty inconsistent and not always a good way, but the idea behind it is that he's true to himself, otherwise he's not who he is. This is who I am. And if I went against that, if I decided not to hold up these values that I built my whole life on, I wouldn't be me. And I've got to be me. And I appreciate that a lot. People say the same thing, the argument about, like, is Superman an out-of-date character, or what these characters would be like in real life. I think there's room for all of it. I think there's room for characters like Superman, who are paragons of virtue, and guys like Spider-Man, who are regular guys with superpowers trying to do good, and characters even like Daredevil and the Punisher, who do violent, harsh things for ostensibly a good reason. I think there's room in comics for all of these things, just like there's room in any other fiction. I don't think you necessarily have to have only one and not any others. So I appreciate that a lot of different sides of that were presented here, and definitely it was a commentary on comics in the 90s and how one-sided it had gotten as far as the ultra-violence and as far as getting away from a lot of the stuff that Marvel and superhero comics were built on. They didn't always do it well, but when they did it well, I think it made you think, and I appreciated that.
Okay. Some good stuff. I won't get too in-depth on this one. It did well. An awesome video game came out of it. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it as a read. It's definitely part of Spider-Man history that I had always been aware of and never had the opportunity to sit down. If you'd like to learn a little bit about Carnage, you're going to watch him mostly fight it out in these issues. You might be able to see at least a significant chunk of his history from back in the 90s. One of the biggest storylines that he was ever in. And he was pretty impactful as a character. One more question, Benjamin, and I'll let you get the plugs here. Do you have a favorite artist out of these issues that we read? How many artists do we have? 4 or 5?
Yeah, it was 4 to go along with the 4 different writers.
Who was your favorite artist that drew Carnage?
It was Bagley. It was Mark Bagley. But then again, Mark Bagley was one of my favorite Spider-Man artists ever. And like I said, he designed Carnage in the first place, so his Carnage, I think, is naturally going to look really, really good and dynamic, because he's the one that's going to know him better than anybody. But, yeah, that's an easy one for me to answer. I don't want to put too much of a damper on this entire show and this entire 14-part story, but I had to mention this, and I don't remember if I brought it up at all previously. Speaking of Mark Bagley, and also speaking of J.M. DeMatteis, There is a Spider-Man and Batman crossover comic written by J.M. DeMatteis and drawn by Mark Bagley. It features Carnage and the Joker. It's pretty good. You might consider covering it on this show, but I'm going to have to spoil it now to make my point. It took 14 parts of this story to bring down Carnage. In Spider-Man Batman, Batman hands Carnage his ass in 3 pages. And it's a better told story because it's shorter and it's a single writer and a good artist. And
yes.
Bagley draws a really good Batman and a really good Joker too. So there's that too to get out there.
That's awesome.
It was good to revisit this. I was a lot harsher on this comic before preparing for this show than I was on. This is the third time that I've read it all the way through. I'm able to see the good in it. There's plenty of bad, but the good stuff is worth holding up. It's an interesting point in Spider-Man history. Not necessarily good or bad, but certainly interesting. It ends on hope, which is important. The whole story ends on hope, that's got to count for something.